How are they going to stack up for you? Yet to find out. 300 Blackout and the legendary 3006. Stay tuned, we're about to deep dive. G'day, I'm JD, your host of Outback Lens podcast. Thanks again for joining me this week. This is part 2 of our Australian comprehensive guide to cartridges. What's been happening? What happened last week? I hope you got some relevant information out of that bit of a high-level overview. Just remember that we're here to help the average user gain enough knowledge to make great decisions when they're in store. So last week we skimmed over, as I said, competition sort of cartridges. We definitely went through a range of hunting and sporting cartridges, and we touched on some old lever action cartridges. So that's where we ended up. And I really felt that the 300 Blackout, this little guy, if anyone needs some revision, the 300 Blackout is one of Australia's most underrated cartridges. And I firmly believe that. And for, I'm going to say, 60, 70% of Aussies, cartridge like the 300 Blackout in your kit, in your safe, would be a well-used and versatile bit of equipment for your hunting and agriculture farming needs. Look, guys, we do the weather report. If you're new to the channel, thanks very much for popping by. The live stream side of things is something where we just try to, as I've said, skim through some great bits of information for an average user to really gain that knowledge. So weather report, Darling Downs, it's been pretty good. Nice 30-degree days, a little bit hotter. Yesterday got hot and a little bit humid yesterday, sort of in those early 30s. You know, Sunday's a pretty good day. Managed to get out and see the Darling Downs Heavy Horse Festival, one of those great community events. I did that Saturday afternoon, took the family, had a look around. Did do a little short video while we're there, took a bunch of photos. When I get that edited up, I'll share it to the page. But all in all, it's been a busy little week. So I hope yours was safe, and you know, those guys that are planting. I notice there's a bunch of guys getting some oats in at the moment. That's great news for us. It means people have got confidence to plant, and that's good news for the rest of Australia when our farmers have confidence. I'm trying to think. Sunday did a little bit of filming as well. It was a bit hotter, but did a few little scope mounting videos and a few tips and tricks on that kind of thing while I helped another mate out sort his 22 Magnum. So watch out for that, both here on Outback Lens, and probably will end up being on Outback Optics because the guys have asked me to do that in the past. So not sure it'll get on Outback Optics. We might need to go to the range and get the lighting a bit better, and it was pretty bright out there, copping that western sun at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Sunday. So, all right, let's rip into it. I really wanted to focus on 3006, an industry legend, an industry icon of a cartridge, and really a bit more detail and a bit more information on what I believe is Australia's most underrated cartridge, the 300 Blackout. Let's start with the 300 Blackout. First of all, drop a comment. If you got a comment, what's your favorite cartridge? There's something you want to know specifically, I'll keep my eye from time to time on Facebook and see what's going on. But yeah, let's see what's happening here. Hang on, guys. Let me just tap this. Yeah, so let's get into the 300 Blackout. Why do I like it? Now, we did a 5-minute little speak on it last week. Let's get into it a little bit more. I want to get into some specifics of the versatility and the platform. So we're probably going to be given a little bit more information than we normally would do. But again, I think it's pretty useful because you'll get a gauge of where it's going to sit for, again, average users. I'm on the ADI. Most of you probably have heard of their ammunition and probably have heard of some of their powder that we use here for the sporting market in Australia. And ADI actually export a lot of this powder to the US market as well. So it's good quality powder. It's very temperature stable, which is a big selling point over many other powders worldwide. They're not as temperature sensitive powder which means for reloaders, you can get really accurate ammunition, whether it's in 40 degrees or whether it's in, -5 degrees, you're going to have very consistent ammunition still. Let's talk about a 110 grainer. I touched on that last week about where I think that 110 grainer can sit in the market. You can buy factory ammo like Hornady in 110 grain. There's Barnes that I know of off the top of my head, and there's a myriad of more of those type of 110 grainers. The 110 grainer, I think, really fits our light skin game, and again, touched on that last week. Most Aussie users that I talk to are generally pointing a rifle at light skin game, goats, foxes, things like that. So a nice 110 grainer with a varmint style projectile, like a Nosler Varmageddon or a Hornady VMAX or any of those kind of similar cartridges, similar bullets, will work really well on that light skin game because the cartridge is going to open up, the projectile is going to open up. So I'm on the website here, as I mentioned, and I'm looking at 110 grain loads. Now, 110 grain Hornady VMAX, depending on how you want to load it, you can either make it around that 1,000 feet a second, or you could create something like a 2,000 feet a second load. Very, very able, 2,220 feet a second. That's a very good load for many, many game in this country. It's going to do the job. Nice light bullet. And as I said last week, the next step would be something like a 125 grainer. So again, a little bit more energy downrange because it's a heavier projectile. So you come off a little bit of velocity. Things like Nosler ballistic tips, they're just banging under 2,000 feet a second. Reloading might not be for everyone, but I'm using it to see the availability of projectiles that generally most manufacturers will offer in factory ammunition. Most manufacturers are going to offer 7, 8, or 9 loads for something like this. Sure, not as many as 223. You probably think worldwide in the common market, you can probably find 70 or 80 different loads across the market. And probably here in Australia, we could probably get a lot of those when suppliers in good supply, I should say, out of those countries that make it. So yes, it's not quite as much as something like a 223, but it's understandable because 223 is one of the biggest produced cartridges in the world. But 300 Blackout has a really special place for not only law enforcement. As I said, law enforcement has accepted the cartridge for certain types of use cases. Here in Australia, we can do exactly the same thing. We can really spread our wings, for want of a better phrase, when it comes to having a versatile piece of equipment. Again, 135 Sierra, low point, sort of sitting there at 2,000 feet a second. And, you start getting into some subsonic loads. 140 grainer, with Trail Boss has been somewhat available again recently as a reloading powder, 900 feet a second. When you start to go down the list, happens to be a Winchester deer season round. When I can get my face out of the camera. Come on, focus. There we go. Sorry, guys. That particular one, there's a 150 grainer ballistic tip. Again, this particular 2205, 1,600 feet a second, 1,800 feet a second, 168 grainer, 1,600 feet a second, 1,800 feet a second. Then you start getting into some interesting loads, some Hornady subsonic projectiles, specifically made to open up at really low velocity. So 190 grain projectile doing 1,056 feet a second. Some others here, I'm just going through. Again, 205 grainer, 205. I saw some heavier ones here. 220 grain doing 1,064 feet a second. Now, there's a lot of small block hunting done in Australia. There's a lot. Sure, there's definitely the big open, pastoral properties as well. But the small block hunting that's done here in Australia, where you've got deer and pig and many animals that have a little bit better bone structure, and a little bit more solider to put down. When you start getting into some of these bigger, heavier bullets, a lot of people would think, geez, that's not going that fast. It might not necessarily do the job. I wish I had some videos I could show you, but there's a myriad on YouTube of white-tailed deer in the US and pigs and all sorts of stuff getting brought down with some of these heavier projectiles. If you think about where we've come from, cartridges like 30-30, 38-55, 44-40, they're bringing pigs and deer down, not just in this country, but worldwide for nearly 100 years before any of our modern stuff came through, at least 50 years, if you take it from the 1860s or so to the years when things like 30 first became, factory chambered in rifles. So there's a lot of animals that can still get taken down very humanely, very ethically, with big, heavy bullets going slow. Cartridges like 44 Magnum and 357 have taken heaps of pigs. They're mostly only going 12, 1300 feet a second, some more, sure, if you're running it out of a 16 or 18-inch barrel. But generally the ammunition's designed for 6 or 8-inch handguns. So what I'm saying is you can do quite a bit with a versatile, big, heavy projectile. And I just really like the sense of making sure that a cartridge like this, like a 300 Blackout with 200 grainers, is going to see your projectile not just stay in the game, but stay in the boundaries of where you're looking to use your system. It's quite interesting to start to think about those ballistics of that, that's for sure. I'd probably want to talk about a couple of other little points here. I think load testing is something that some people struggle to get done, struggle to really sit down. They find it painful. You just want to get out, use your gear. I'll show you a little picture here in a second. It'll help you understand why. This is some experience that I had just recently, early in January, down in New South Wales. I was there, and again, I was working on some 300 Blackout with a mate. So I'll just share this screen and we'll just have a bit of a look through it together. So a pretty cool looking target there. That happens to be a bunch of load testing for 300 Blackout factory ammunition, as well as some reloads. So when we're getting through this, I thought it was really sort of pertinent to mention about doing the paperwork and the homework, particularly with a cartridge like 300 Blackout, because of the versatility. I really find if you haven't done the homework, it makes it really difficult to come up with the right solutions or the right answers, if you want to say that. So I'll now zoom in here. Hopefully it doesn't ruin our life. All right. So as you can see up the top here, we've got some Winchester factory 200 grain subsonics. Now I use the Garmin chronograph. If you don't have a chronograph, I've said it before, they are a great investment into your kit. And I think everyone needs one, regardless whether you're doing factory ammunition or you are reloading. I think they're a very valuable tool to see what's going on in your equipment. 990 feet a second. That's not packet ammunition. That means that's not what was written on the side of the box. Can everyone tell us, drop a comment if you know the reason why going off a packet of ammunition can be wrong? And I'll show you here in a minute as well. I'll circle back to that. But out of this particular barrel, now the firearm was a Ruger American Ranch, 16-inch barrel, a Generation 1, and it was doing 900 a second, which is great. That's, I think, for a lot of people on small block, if you've got horses next door, you've got, neighbors looking for a tree change from the city, that might give you some pressure about the loud noises in rural areas. Using this and doing what you need to do safely is, with less noise, can really go a long way to helping everyone if you're someone that's concerned about that. And next to it was a Federal 220 grainer, so it's 5 feet a second quicker, but you notice the group size was a little bit better, and it was 5 feet a second quicker with 20 grains more lead downrange. So the Federal was definitely my pick there when I was doing this little test here. It's a nice piece of record to fold the target up like this and just stick it away and file it away for later. So you notice there that we've got 100 on the far left column here. We've got 110 grain Hornady VMAX at 2,465 feet a second. I wasn't shooting this, by the way. This is a friend of mine that was shooting the groups. I was running other things in the background. And next to it, we had 110 grain Barnes projectile. Now, to note that the 110 grain VMAX, as I've said, is a light-skinned, great for light-skinned game. However, the 110 grain Barnes next to it is quite a heavily constructed bullet, so it's great for penetration. I would challenge you to scour the internet to see what kind of penetration that 110 grain Barnes projectile has, regardless of the animal's skin type, whether it's a gelatin test or some anecdotal testing that a YouTube reviewer has done. Check out that 110 grain, 2,351 feet a second. I think that would be a cracker of a cartridge to use. And we skim across to the third column there. I'm just trying to read my own writing there. Let me see what I wrote there. Okay, so there's some Reloads 180 grainer. 1,671 feet a second out of that nice little 5-shot group there. You know, that's not too bad. I'm pretty happy with that. 180 grainer, you know, giving you a little bit of best of both worlds. And again, you're in that 30-30 sort of territory, depending on what bullet weight you're using. You're in that territory of some of those old lever action cartridges we discussed last week, which are still very, very good for our market. And the main point I wanted to point out here is the point of aim here. So the rifle was sighted in. The rifle was sighted in for these subsonic loads because the gentleman was mainly using subsonics on his property, and he was aiming center bull, and that's where the groups were dropping. We didn't do any zeroing adjustment till after we did this paperwork, as I like to call it. So what we see happening is just in this group, if this is the point of aim to there, let's say that was 1.5 inches or 2 inches north of point of aim. When you come down to this guy, you notice that this circle here was actually the point of aim. Those bottom 3 circles were the point of aim, and that's how much higher up the page the 110 grain supersonic ammo landed. You know, what are we going to say that is? 4-6 inches at least, something in that distance up the page. You know, that's a significant rise up the page. That goes to show you what velocity does. And if you've not done this paperwork, if you own a cartridge like a 300 Blackout, a 350 Legend, or even a 308, if you're going to run multiple different pieces of ammunition, and it's a great example of what will happen with a 22 long rifle. I'm a big believer in the versatility of a 22. Again, we talked last week, you can get ammunition at 1,800 feet a second, or you can get 710 or 20 feet a second ammunition. And the same thing's going to happen. You're going to have a point of aim maybe here and a point of impact, depending on how you've sighted in. But the reason I wanted to dwell on this just a little bit longer is because what tends to happen is people don't always pair their optic or the optic situation or think through. They just may potentially buy whatever the person behind the counter recommends, and that person may not have asked the right questions to say, you know, how are you going to use this bit of kit? You know, how's this bang stick going to be used? Are you looking at being very versatile? Are you looking to be doing closer in shots and further out shots, etc.? Because in my opinion, if someone's asking or inquiring about that kind of cartridge, a 300 Blackout, a 350 Legend, a modern 3030, they're going to be the questions that I would be asking. And if you're someone who bought an optic online, you should be asking that question yourself. How am I going to be using it? Am I only just going to be using one piece of ammunition and that's all? Because what I'm trying to get at is something like this. Now, there's many different types of these kind of optics. If I was to recommend an optic for a 300 Blackout or a 3030 or something of that nature, that would be the kind of optic that I would put on it. A couple of weeks ago, during our discussions on thermal and night vision, we talked about the Alpex from Hick Micro and most of thermal products having a picture-in-picture function, and how it's like having two scopes on the one gun. Where that would be a great example of why in traditional optics like this guy, this one happens to be a 1:4 Endeavour 30mm tube from Outback Optics. So it's going to give you just enough to make that small block, say fox shot or wild dog at 100 or 110 meters or something in that nature, somewhere in that realm. It gives you the flexibility to use the 1 power for close-up shots. We talk pigs and dogs and anything that you might happen to get up close on, but it still gives you the flexibility of that 4 power. I really like this kind of optic for something like a 30-30, 300 Blackout, 45-70, 38-55, 44 mag, 357. I really like this. Something like that would be versatile. If you did the paperwork with an optic like this between subsonics and supersonics, just like we'd spoken about a minute ago, and used that target we'd just shown. Sorry, I'm terrible headache today and I'm struggling to think straight all day. Kinked my neck last night, I think. Anyway, that would give you the flexibility. And if the reticle you particularly choose has some holdover marks or happens to have a thick reticle and a very thin reticle just like this, you could sight the thin reticle, the center of the reticle in for your 110 grain ammunition. And you could, by doing the paperwork, load a magazine with subsonics, see where it shoots using that same hold point. And I bet you'd probably find in a lot of optics, particularly with a cartridge like 300 Blackout, that the thicker post or some kind of hold point in there for your optic is probably going to work really, really well. It'll let you not have to mount 2 scopes. You may notice on the Outback Optics catalog, for example, there's a lot of Picatinny rails mounted here with other smaller reflex sights on there. That's how this gentleman happened to have his Ruger Ranch set up. He had a 1:6 power optic, and he had a Picatinny mount with a small reflex sight on the top, and the reflex sight was sighted in for about 25 meters for subsonics, and we had the center 1:6 scope sighted in at the end of the day for the 110 grains Barnes ammunition. So a little extra bit of equipment on there can really turn your optic into a dual purpose system. And that's what I really wanted to get through about how underrated some of these modern cartridges can be. And a lot of it, in my opinion, is just some lack of exploration by consumers when they're particularly going for their first rifle system. And sometimes it's particularly from some dealers, you might find that this cartridge might seem to them potentially boutique if they haven't had a lot of people ask for it. So they themselves might not have had a chance to really experience the versatility firsthand. Therefore, they don't necessarily like recommending something that they can't really give a lot of great information about. So, which is a good thing, but a little bit of homework on a cartridge like this. And next week, and I'll circle back at the end of this little half an hour segment here. Next week, I think we'll go over how some of these modern cartridges, where you can save money. So watch that, because I've got some sums I've already started doing on these cartridges and where I think you can save money. You'd be quite surprised where, if you're willing to put a little bit of work into, or, grow your kit or expertise or skills. 300 Blackout, what else did we need to know? I think I probably wanted to clarify a couple of things when I was editing our last week's podcast. It's up on YouTube and Spotify. If you didn't know, it's ready there for you guys. So please please feel free to go and have a watch. Give us a thumbs up, like, share, subscribe. Versatility in cartridges. Here's the question. Does it make a difference to your buying purchase? If you're a regular user of Outback products, if you're a regular user of optics, if you're a regular user of firearms and ammunition, does cartridge versatility play a part in your buying decision? I think it's a great thing to have a conversation about, because again, the average user doesn't necessarily know this. We can all, in this time where it's a little bit tight with money for most people, I think we can still enjoy our sport, still do what we need to do, particularly from a rural aspect, and gain some knowledge and experience and expand our horizons with the equipment we have. But I think I'd probably just cover off and say the 300 Whisper from JDJ Industries a bunch of years ago was really the guy who forged the path, is the right word I think I'd like to use, who created the way for cartridges like this. The Whisper family of cartridges are all very similar to this. They're all big projectiles in small little cases, focused on being sort of under that 1,000 feet a second or thereabouts, but delivering big energy due to kinetic energy with bullet weight. It's a great idea. And the 300 Blackout, I think, has been one of the successes stemming from JDJ Industries' hard work in the late 90s and early 2000s. As I said, where it's really adopted and picked up has been out of the US market, and we see plenty enough support for it in the Australian market, and we see more and more each year goes past. And I think, to clarify, and this is going to lead you into some thinking about where I'm going next week for some cost savings with all cartridges. This cartridge, part of the reason I like it, it's a 223 case. It's one of the most prolific cartridges you can get used. You can get them secondhand once fired if you like. Quite often they're easy to get your hands on. And really, this cartridge has lineage from the 221 Fireball, which is what JDJ Industries really modeled a lot of that initial work on in the early 2000s. But when Remington and Advanced Armament Corp, which is essentially a part of the suppressor division, if I recall, they really got together with this cartridge with military and suppression in mind. And that's really where the cartridge stemmed out. But as it migrated to bolt action rifles, the countries like Australia that has limited access to semi-automatic firearms, the versatility, the bolt action in that 300 Blackout really, really started to shine through, I think, from those that wanted to give the cartridge a go. I touched on last week, females, small frame people, you can fire that big 30 cal bullet with less than 223 recoil or similar to 223 recoil. In my opinion, it's a different feeling recoil, but it is less, in my opinion, particularly if you wanted to run a muzzle brake where that device is going to push the gases sideways that come out the barrel, reducing the Newton's law coming back in your shoulder. So I think that lineage of where the cartridge was developed for to be a flexible platform for law enforcement and other groups similar has the same resounding answer for us here in Australia. Like, we want flexibility in a lot of things that we use in the bush, particularly if I'm a farmer. You don't know whether you're dispatching a cow or a sheep or you're knocking a pig or a wild dog. So if you had 2 magazines in your car or your equipment, wherever you're using the firearm that day, loaded with 2 different types of ammunition, with a bit of red tape for subsonics around the bottom of one magazine, a bit of green tape for supersonic 110 grade ammunition, and you knew, because you'd done the paperwork on a target, how to use your optic or what works for your optic and where your holdovers were, it's a no-brainer. I've seen it. I've done it myself. I've seen it many times where there's a bit of masking tape on the side of a rifle stock with a little note about where to hold for what brand of ammunition. And you don't need a big bit of masking tape, but something like that. There's flip-up scope covers now, where in the inside of the flip-up scope cover has a little rewritable, almost like a whiteout board in there where you can make those little notes for your cartridges at what distances. Super easy. Like, the things available to us now with great cartridges like this, modern powder, good optics, new accessories coming all the time that I think make a big difference. These little cartridges now, these type of potentially cartridges that were seen a few years ago as maybe a bit too boutique, are now making their way to the to the average user. So that's why I wanted to drill down and focus and give this little cartridge its own sort of little bit of breath and oxygen. I don't think there's too much else I wanted to cover. I took some notes here just to try and keep me on track. Let me just double check. I think we've covered a lot of it. There's plenty of info. Like I said, we went through a bit of the ADI information there and saw how many projectiles they have done testing for and saw the variety of velocity. There's bound to be something there, particularly if you're a reloader, that's going to do what you needed to do, and you can probably chisel out 2 or 3 other little niche jobs for this one piece of equipment if you bought the right ammunition and put a right combination of optic on it. So that's Australia's most underrated cartridge in my book. That's a little bit of a deep dive into it. I really wanted to give it some oxygen, and I wanted to put it up against the legend. As I've said previous, this cartridge, in my opinion, is the cartridge that pretty well everyone else has tried to make cartridges to emulate, to be better than, to improve on. 3006, some people still think, and in the US they say it's their granddaddy's gun because there were so many 3006s US, particularly after the World War I and World War II. And as I said, previous episodes, 303 was the same in Australia. 303 we had a plethora of 303 SMLE actions made down in, all the Lithgow made 303s. We have had access to them. We had ammunition and brass and powders. So reloaders went about doing what they do, creating new cartridges, filling holes in the market when a lot of people had 222s and less than that. There wasn't the availability of good cartridges, flat shooting cartridges hadn't necessarily got to Australia. We talked to people like my grandfather who remembers these kind of things, and most people had a 22 and a shotgun, and if you were lucky, you had a 303. And then as the late 60s and 70s came on, more and more people got access to cartridges like, 222 and 243 and, as the time went on. But in the bush, there was still 303s, 22s and shotguns and those old lever action calibers that had been around for a very long time. So when the 3006, if you're American, you probably want to say 30-6. In Australia, we probably say more 3006, as in a bit of history. 3006, it was, again, something that came out of a military contract. And if you're starting to get the drift from some of these conversations we've had, if you do a lot of research, some of the most common cartridges in the world to this day have been military cartridges from yesteryear. 4570. I think it was from you talk about a Springfield contract from 1872 or 1878 off the top of my head from the US military. They were trialing all sorts of cartridges for their systems of the day. 4570 is one that they settled on in the end, and they tried 45, multiples. There's 4560s, 4570s, 120s, there's 45 ones. There's all sorts of configurations. The 06 military cartridge, 100 years of it, and we're still using it, and it still has a huge following worldwide. 223, again, Vietnam era type of cartridge or development at that time. We're still using it. It's still one of the most popular cartridges in the world. Again, when that happens, it becomes a military adopted cartridge. You will find that the cartridge tends to hang around. So if you're someone that's worried about, if I buy a new Fandangle caliber or cartridge that a mate of a mate recommended to me, is it going to be around? And I'd probably say if it's a military cartridge, right down to be an army or a law enforcement group's standard issue cartridge, like 9mm in pistol. There's a great example. They will be around for a very long time. History has proven it. When we go back to the 3006, it was an evolution of the 03. Again, the US military was looking for a new cartridge after the Spanish-American Wars. The Spanish-American War, Theodore Roosevelt himself, if you've ever been into the Old West and all those kind of things that we see a lot in the fringe of our trade in Australia because so much of our equipment comes from America. Theodore Roosevelt was a great conservationist. He was an American president. He was a rough rider in the Spanish-American War. He was a hunter. He traveled the world. He's a very notable figure in world history. He was one of the first people to set up national park system in America, and many countries, including Australia, were either right there with him at the time setting up national parks or pretty well not far behind. So Theodore Roosevelt was up against 7.57 Mausers, which again were a bolt action rifle, and the Spanish were using them. Generally, to this day, is still a very good cartridge, 7x57, and it mimics a lot of other cartridges that, a lot of other cartridges have mimicked it to this day. So that performance out of a 757 is still notable. If you go into big game history, you'll find that 7x57 has been iconic in the big game African scene, particularly in the 1900s. And because Theodore Roosevelt went up as a leader of the Rough Riders, went up against that cartridge, and the US had an older cartridge, 3040 Krag, in some trapdoor rifles and other configurations, that they were getting pinholed because of the simple fact that the cartridge ballistics between the two rifle systems were 2 centuries apart. You know, very much the 3040 Krag and that system, even though it was updated in recent years before, it was still last century's thinking. In that era, those 7B57s were really a modern technology, good bullets, new modern powders, all that sort of stuff. So they were really outgunned, for want of a better terminology. And when all that happened, they set about the US finding a cartridge to keep up with that and find a new rifle platform that did. So things like the cartridge, the testing, all those things that go along with product development, regardless if it's a fishing rod or it's a baby change table or it's a cartridge. You go through multiple evolutions of something, a group of people decide that's what we want, and they ended up at the 3003, which quickly soon got changed to the 3006. 3006 is because it's a 30 caliber and it was adopted for the 1906 contract. So that's as simple as that cartridge got its name and was often referred to as the 30 government for a long time. But when you start that journey, cartridge served in this 3006 cartridge served in World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and also some special missions past then. So this cartridge has seen some incredible amount of worldwide service, but particularly out of the US Arms. So having that plethora of product available after the war, the sporting hunter in America, and you talk coming into Depression times, you really look and see that people were looking to replace their old lever actions. There was again a whole heap of these actions, these barrel actions, these rifles, war stock, and companies like Remington and Winchester started chambering this new modern cartridge with spire point bullets instead of 220, I think, grain, big, heavy, round ball style projectiles, so really round nose projectiles. Started chambering them. The military had adopted this lighter spire point bullet, and the 3006 legacy had well and truly kicked off by the time the early 20s came and the firearms were getting chambered from the factory in this cartridge in that modern bolt action design that we know today. Again, those Mauser style actions, most gun companies worldwide have lineage back to that action, the same as this cartridge is one of the biggest granddaddies, I'll use the American terminology, for other cartridges. And I'll run through a few. Cartridges like 2506, 270, 280 Rem, 280 Ackley, 35 Whelan, and the whole cartridge of family of Whelan cartridges. Whelan was a colonel, and he was a cartridge designer. He developed a whole bunch of cartridges of this platform, and so did P.O. Ackley, one of the most, in my lifetime, someone, if you ever want to read any material, it's about P.O. Ackley and what he did for the trade, was very interesting. P.O. Ackley's Ackley'd just about every cartridge. Actually, when I built my most recent 3006, I would have chambered it in 3006 Ackley if I could have. It was just a matter of having to order the reamer, and I wanted it a bit quicker for a particular thing I wanted to do. So I ended up just settling on the 3006, and I haven't lost anything in my book by doing that. But you go into the Gibbs cartridge. Gibbs was another cartridge designer. There's the 30 Gibbs. The list of cartridges that have lineage back to this is just so long that I don't think I could even list it. I did make a couple of notes on roughly how many I thought it was at a glance, and I'm just going to scale to it if I can. I'm coming to it. There's quite a bit of information. I've cut and pasted and copied and all that sort of stuff that you do when you're just making sure you're on your game. Here we go. Right. Some common ones, as I said, 6mm06, 2506, 6.506, 7mm06, 8mm06, 33806, 37506, again was known as a 375 Whelan, 41 Great Lakes. It's a 41 caliber bullet. As I said, P.O. Ackley was just massive. Rocky Gibbs, as I discussed. There's just so many cartridges that we use today that have been the benchmark. And the reason it's the benchmark because if you can take moose, elk, bear, deer, pigs, you name it, there is not much that you couldn't point a correctly loaded 3006 at. Even in this country, when you start talking buff, even though I'm sure a lot of guides, if you're in guiding situation, would want a larger caliber. Some of them recommend 375 and upwards. But my point is it can be done. It has been done. It's been done for over 100 years with animals that size. You start talking about a very versatile bit of equipment. Again, I'm on ADI's site here. 24-inch, 1 in 10 barrel. There it is. I said it. What the answer to the question for anyone that was wondering, barrel length is the reason why the packet of ammunition velocity will be often different to a chronograph. That's why a chronograph is very important, particularly if you're someone who is starting to get a little bit more serious and you're looking to make sure that optics line up with your ballistics of your cartridge, things like that. That's the reason you'll find a chronograph handy, and also it can be a troubleshooter if you're having one cartridge that's flying here or there and not staying with the rest of the group. And particularly if you're a reloader, you might be able to find the fact that something's going on with your reloads, and the only way you'll really be able to do it and really get a handle on it is with a chronograph. You'll find out that, oh geez, that one is 30 or 40, 50, 60, 100 feet a second slower or faster than the rest of the cartridges that you've made. Again, we're here to ADI, 110 grain. Wow, 110 grain, 3006 going, there we go, 3,096 feet a second, as in 400 feet a second, as in nearly 500 feet a second with 110 grain projectile. Versatile. You talk about light skin game, that'll put very nice little holes in them. And the projectile will open up nicely. You start to look at that I've got a bunch of 125 grains I've loaded, and loaded for, actually the cartridge, the projectile, I should say, was made with 300 Blackout in mind, and I've just found it versatile enough that Sierra projectile to load in 300 Blackout as well as load in 3006, and 125 grain Sierra in a 3006 ADIs here telling me 3,000 feet a second plus 3,200 feet a second. And again, you start just the amount of loads that are available for this cartridge, and most dealers will stock a good selection, particularly on the East Coast. As I discussed on the first episode, the West Coast can be a little bit more particular based on some laws that they had, and you might not find as big a selection of things like 270, 3006, 2506 cartridges like that. 130 grain spear hollow point, one of the best varmint projectiles ever made, in my opinion. 3,100 feet a second, big hollow point. Most companies are loading 130 grain hollow point, particularly in 308. It's been a big success in this country. And for many years, some manufacturers like Federal only loaded it for Australia. So the Australian distributors saw a niche, worked out some load and actually got it made, and the Australian community accepted it. It was very popular cartridge for companies like Federal here in Australia. But we come back to where I like to really sit and see this cartridge's optimal do-it-all. The big thing about this cartridge over 308 that some people don't understand is if you have a 308 and you want to run heavy projectiles in it as well as light, 3006 can often be your answer, because the 3006 will run 200, 220 grain projectiles, and often like factory style chambered rifles won't run to that heavier projectile in 308. So this is where old granddaddy still has got the game, because set up and designed that way. I'm just scrolling through. I'm trying to find 150 grain load. You probably got 100 feet a second on a 308. So there is a benefit, again, depending on the load and how you drive it, and the projectile you use. Running in this one, when I can get to the load here, because there's so many loads, like I'm still scrolling and I'm only at 165 grain. I like 165 and 168 grain projectiles for 3006. I think it's a great medium. Here we go. Hornady hollow point boat tail, starting load of 44 grains at 2,600 feet a second, or an upper end load at about 27, nearly 2,800 feet a second with that powder. I'm just going to skim through now and try and find in a 168 what seems to be 2859. That's a good load. Nearly 2,900 feet a second with 168 grain. That's really moving. There you go. 27. Like, that versatility of that bullet weight, that energy, a good bullet, a boat tail bullet in the wind, with modern bullets, the 3006 has really got some more legs. Some people don't like it's built on a standard action length, or a lot of us these days call it a long action. It is a little bit longer than a 308, so it takes a little bit more cycling of the action. You'd probably say that with the modernization of chassis and stocks these days, you probably could have said a few years ago that at 308 configuration, there was more aftermarket parts and aftermarket magazines. So you could convert firearms from a 5-shot box magazine inside a stock through to a 10-shot drop magazine, a little bit easier with a 308. But 3006 now and modern world, they do box mags for 3006. They do better stocks and aftermarket kits. So that is not a point in anymore. Some people, particularly some deer hunters, you may need to do a follow-up shot quicker, like a really short length of a throw. And also, sorry, got itchy nose. One of the other things that have probably changed in cartridge design, and that's been making cartridges more efficient. So there's been a big trend towards these short, fat cartridges like 6.5 PRC. And I'll put the 3006 up against it just for reference. So a little bit of difference there. Short, fat cartridge versus long, skinny cartridge. And there's some efficiency reasons with how the cartridge burns and develops powder as the reason that has potentially got some popularity. The other thing really, I think for a hunter, and again, the average hunter, shooter, pest controller, I think the 3006 still holds 5 rounds in a magazine. Some of them new cartridges like Fancy Do was a 6.5 PRC, which I own, only do 3 in factory configurations. Sure, some do drop magazines where you can put more in. But if you talk about standard hunting configuration sporter rifles, sporter for those new people generally refers to the sporting configuration of the rifle for an average user. So that would be, say, a synthetic or wooden stock, a very light barrel, an internal box magazine, a rifleman style stock, a Winchester Model 70 style stock. It holds 5 shots. Where in a similar configuration with some of these modern short fat cartridges, you're only getting 3 shots. So there's a big tick in my mind For me personally, 3/4 of an inch longer or whatever. I don't even remember off the top of my head what the action length variance is. I think it's about 3/4 of an inch if I recall. Might not be that much. For that little bit of extra length of cycling, for me, it makes no difference. So the 3006 for me proves its versatility there, how much energy you can get. And again, you can go into all the wind drift charts and energy charts. Happy to refer you to some. Drop me a comment and I'll send you the right way if you need to. But I want to skip right down to some of these loads, and there's just so many loads. It's not funny. Here we go, a 220 grain Hornady round nose bullet doing 24 a second out of a bolt action rifle. That is not a lever action or anything like that, and it's a 30 caliber. That is a very flexible piece of equipment, 110 grains to 220 grains. You notice there's a bit of a trend. I like versatile pieces of equipment. Don't get me wrong, I have competition stuff that besides that one match, you can't use it for anything else unless you strip the gun apart and make it into a more standard rifle. Bench rest rifles are like that. Some F-class rifles can be like that. So, you know, I do like versatility, though, when it comes to hunting rifles or sporting rifles. And hopefully you can see now that the Granddaddy can still be very, very reputable in today's market. It can still be a great choice. Modern ballistics, modern bullets, modern design really have given a bit of life extra to these cartridges. Cartridges like 280 Ackley improved have really still driven that action length in lightweight mountain rifles, what I would call mountain rifles, carbon barrels, carbon stocks, 5 shots in the magazine instead of, as I said, 3 or 4 in those short fat cartridges. So 3006 is still here, still kicking, still a great choice if you're someone that is not using it on as much light skin game. But if you do happen to be that 10 grain loading, whether it's a factory load or whether it's something you've loaded yourself, really does still show that the legend is still absolutely alive with 3006, even here in Australia. And new underrated cartridges need more people to get them going, get them aware. And as I alluded to in previous episodes, platforms or availability of platforms in Australia is key. We don't necessarily get as much selection as other markets. Our flow of product to us is not as quick. So getting a product that's flexible in a platform where there's more availability to choose caliber, i.e. the Ruger Ranch has a great, or the Ruger American series full stop has a great range of cartridge selection. Again, all the way from 270 and cartridges like that, 223, 308. And that's what I like about this little 300, because it's a 223 platform. Buying magazines now and in the future will be so easy because you can buy 223 magazines. They'll still fit in your 300 Blackout. And if you bought a modular platform like a Ruger Ranch, where you can buy a Magpul style magazine and you could fit that in 5 different rifle systems you own because you've got a 223 variant, or the same even goes with some of the 3006s. If you've got a multiple 3006 case platforms, you can do the same. You can get those great new magazines available and just load them with a different cartridge, but they all fit each other. The versatility in that sort of, I guess, Henry Ford style thinking that's crept into the market in the last few years, I really support. And that's why I like modular or versatile optics. Something I'd recommend for 3006. I run it on my 3006. And as I mentioned, it's on my 3006 is on the front cover of the Outback Optics magazine there behind us in the background. I think the 4-16 50 from Outback Optics, or that configuration full stop. Again, everyone has a budget and a price point. This Endeavour 16 side focus model, hello, old little head there. 4-16 side focus, 50mm objective at the front, 30mm main tube, has a nice amount of room between the turrets and the eyepiece and the objective bell to be able to get that right eye relief. Some scopes are really short, as I've discussed previously here. Now, if you have bought a short tubed scope and you are a short person with a short neck, you will probably find you'll struggle to get your eye relief. And again, I've talked in recent episodes about buying equipment that has that adjustability to suit you, particularly if you're a new user, you're new to this game, you're new to the market, and it's because you don't necessarily have the built up muscle memory yet to know where to hold the system. So there's a whole bunch of things. The more flexible the piece of equipment you have, the longer it's going to last you, the better bang for buck you're going to get. Again, 4-16-50 Outback optics. It gives you some legs at 16 power. I like the fine duplex in this, or the fine, they call it an OBO fineplex. It's essentially a fine duplex. It works really well for me on that 3006, because that 3006 I use as a bit of a jack of all trades piece of equipment. So the only thing I would probably like to add to this scope, but currently Outback Optics doesn't offer it, is maybe some holdover points in the reticle, just so when I am using multiple types of ammunition that I can do some paperwork, as I showed you with the 300 Blackout there, and get some different hold points noted down in this optic. But that's my choice at the moment. And again, Outback Optics is a sponsor of our channel. No hiding that. If you need any info, drop them a line. Facebook, YouTube, they've got all those channels, Instagram, they've got a contact form on their website, any of that stuff if you need some assistance. But I'm running one, been really happy with it. I'll even show you some extra testing I did just here before we wrap up tonight. Let me open this again, share screen, select the window, and where's my window? There it is, share. All right. So a chronograph, this one's a magneto speed. 4-16-50. As you can see, it is the same gun that's on the cover of the Outback Optics magazine. And there's some of, I think they were actually my reloads. I've got it written down. They were actually my reloads there. And let's see what my chronograph was. We'll see how terrible my reloads are. Hang on, I'll have to drag it up. There we go. So my little chronographs said there, for an 11-shot string, my standard deviation was 18.3 feet a second, which is really good. I'm happy with that for the type of reloading I did for that rifle. Again, I don't always load precision ammo for every single piece of equipment that I have. Again, it's fit for purpose for me. I'm always trying to make sure, hey, this is going to be pig chasing ammunition. I'm going to use economy projectiles, potentially economy brass. I'm going to use best bang for buck powder to get the job done. Things like that. And when it comes to loading, I'm going to do a good load and a safe load, but I'm going to do a load that's quick to put together. And I remember specifically that ammunition was just a bit of a select the load out of the ADI manual, and it worked and it shot. And I've got good standard deviation, nice low standard deviation. Ultimately, I'd like that about 10. That's what I'd sort of like to shoot for. But, 18.3 I'm happy with. So its maximum velocity there was, what does it say? My glasses are a little bit, I got contacts in tonight. So 2860. And my minimum, so my variance there was 2805. So that's what you call extreme spread. So the difference between the fastest load and the slowest load. So, extreme spread's probably not as nice I'd like it, but it's still good. Like factory ammo is still probably that or worse in many instances, depending on the brand, shape and size. So as I said, I thought I'd just show you that little bit of testing from that particular day. Thanks for listening. Oh, before I go, I know someone's going to ask, so I'm going to mention it. It's 3006 in the case. I said this little 300 Blackout's a deer season, a Winchester deer season. You might have seen some ammo that I shared on Facebook. Jump on the Outback Lens Facebook page. You'll be able to see it there. It's actually Remington hog hammer ammunition. Again, it's got a Barnes projectile in it. I've been a bit of a fan of Barnes projectiles for a long time. I don't use them all the time, but again, I use them for a very specific reason. And I've got Barnes projectiles in 250 grain 375 Winchester loads for big stuff. I've got this 168 grain Barnes load from a 3006 with a nice nickel case. I've got Barnes projectiles in some 220 Swift, I was going to say 22-50 that we talked about last week. And I've got Barnes projectiles in another 22-50 load, 36 grain Barnes varmint grenade, which really gets that 22-50 going for kangaroo shooting and such. But guys, that's a bit of a wrap. I know it was a bit of a techno. It felt a bit flat, but I said I've got a terrible headache today, so I'm struggling to keep focused today. But thanks for watching. Next week, we're going to dive into I'm going to say part 3, of course, and I hope to wrap it all up in part 3. But we'll review a little bit of some of these cartridges that I think suit the Australian market, whether it's WA or South Australia, Northern Territory. I might touch on the Territory and a bit more of that big game stuff, just because I didn't cover it as well as I thought I'd do the other day. Again, Territory's got a range of cartridges up there. Some we haven't mentioned, like shotguns, because there's things like geese season up in the Territory. But I probably want to look at things more like in that big beast like buff and pigs. We talked a bit on 308. So I'll wrap and go through a little bit more of those cartridges for some of those areas I felt I went a bit light on. And overall, I want to get into some ways, some hacks, some tips, some tricks that in the future, I think if you bought smart to start with cartridges like that 300 Blackout, how you could potentially save a bit of money when right now ammo costs are pretty expensive for a lot of people. I don't think I'm hearing too many people around the trade saying that ammunition's a terrific price at the moment, particularly if it wasn't too many years ago when even 12 months ago, where some lines of ammunition were 20% cheaper. So, hey guys, it's been great. It always is. I appreciate you letting me waffle on. As always, I'll edit this up, get a few ums, ahs, buts, whens, wheres out, all the rest. I'll trim it back to probably somewhere in that 50 minutes. I always try and aim to get these slightly long ones back to 50 minutes. And tune in next week. I'll try and get some photos up day or two beforehand just to give you some teaser what we're about to talk about. Any questions on the 300 Blackout or 3006, I'd love to answer them for you. As you may notice, I geek out in some of this stuff. I really find not just the optics side of things, the other aspects to the sport that we all enjoy, the recreation part of this sport. I really like the cartridges and the reloading, and it tickles something in your head. Thanks for watching. Signing off, and we'll see you 7:30 next Tuesday. Cheers, guys.